Picture a wedding. Not the one you're imagining. Not the white dress. Not the flowers in careful arrangements. Not the venue you booked 18 months in advance with a deposit that made your stomach hurt. Not two people who swiped right on each other and eventually decided they liked each other enough to invite everyone they know to watch them cry in a field. Picture a contract negotiation. A room with a low ceiling, tallow candles burning yellow and greasy. Two men seated across a table from each other, both with their hands wrapped around cups of wine, both doing the specific kind of careful listening that men do when money's involved, and they don't want to show their hand too early. Your father on one side, his father on the other, a clerk somewhere in the corner, writing everything down in Latin. The scratch of his quill is the loudest thing in the room. Your name comes up maybe a dozen times. You're not in the room. Nobody thought to invite you. That's not an oversight. That's not an accident. That's just how it works. In England in 1347, a marriage is a contract between families, and the woman being married is the subject of the contract, not one of the parties. You are the thing being transferred, present at the negotiation the way a field is present when two men negotiate over land. In theory, the Church says a marriage requires consent. The Council of Trent will eventually codify this, though that's 200 years away. Even now, the canonical position is that you must say yes, that you cannot be compelled. In practice, your father controls your inheritance, your residence, your reputation, and every relationship you have with the outside world. He can make your life extremely comfortable or extremely difficult, based entirely on whether you cooperate. So yes, technically you can say no, but you won't, because nobody told you that you could. Because the women around you who said no are cautionary tales, not heroines. Because you are 15 years old and you trust that your father loves you, and therefore this man he has chosen must be the right choice. Because saying no would mean choosing a future you cannot even imagine over the future you're being handed, and at 15 in 1347 England. You don't yet know enough about the world to understand what either of those futures actually contains. So you will say yes, and what follows, the day, the night, the months, the years, is everything nobody told you about. I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know if anyone actually listens to them to fall asleep, or if you're all just people who enjoy lying in your very comfortable, very safe modern beds, listening to tales of women surviving things that would destroy you personally. Either way, subscribe if you want, get comfortable. This is the story of Agnes Mercer, York merchant's daughter, 15 years old, about to become someone else entirely. Here we go. Your eyes open to the familiar darkness of your room. Half a second passes where everything is fine, where you are just Agnes, sleeping in the room you've slept in since you were 7, with the linen smell of the pillow and the weight of the wool blanket and the sound of the street outside beginning its morning noise. Then it hits you. Today. Today is the day. The betrothal ceremony. Not the wedding itself. That's 3 weeks away. But the formal, legal, witnessed moment when your father will give your hand to the Fitch family, when the terms will be publicly announced, when the priest will bless the contract and everyone will drink wine and it will be done. After today, you belong to someone you have met exactly once. You lie still for a moment and try to remember his face. Thomas Fitch, third son of Sir Robert Fitch of Heckington, Lincolnshire, 24 years old. You saw him in the hall of your father's house 2 weeks ago, when both families came together to look each other over, the way you look over horses before you buy Them. He was tall. That's the clearest thing. Taller than your father. Taller than your brothers. Brown hair cut short in the Norman fashion. A jaw that looked like it had been assembled by someone who was told to make it strong. Clean-shaven, which your mother said was a good sign because it meant he cared about his appearance. He looked at you the way you looked at him. That same careful, polite, evaluating look. The look of two people trying to determine from a 30-minute meeting in a crowded hall whether they could tolerate each other for the next 40 years. You don't know what he decided. You don't know what you decided either. The candle on your window ledge is out, burned down in the night. And the room is that particular grey dark of early October morning. The kind of light that isn't really light yet, just the absence of complete blackness. You can hear the city below. York is already awake. The smell hits you before anything else, the way it always does, because you're on the second floor above the street and the window is cracked open because your nurse Margaret believes fresh air at night prevents fever, which is both probably wrong and somehow doesn't seem to have killed anyone yet. The street smell in York in 1347 is... Actually, let me explain what that means before I go further. You have a drain running down the centre of your street, called a kennel. It collects everything. Rain runoff, yes, but also the waste from every household on the block, dumped out the window each morning with the traditional shout of Gardez-l'eau, from the French Gardez-l'eau, mind the water, which is the city's official warning system for incoming excrement. The kennel flows eventually toward the River Ouse, which also receives the output of the tanning yards and the slaughterhouses and the dyers' workshops upriver, not to mention the pigs. There are always pigs. They root through the garbage in the streets and eat whatever they find, which is genuinely useful, because the pigs are the closest thing to a garbage collection system that York currently has. Add to this coal smoke from 1,000 hearths, because October means fires, and fires mean coal, and coal smoke in an enclosed medieval city is a smell so thick you could practically eat it. The yeasty warm smell from the bakeries opening early, which is the one beautiful note in this entire sensory chord. The sharp mineral smell of the river, the animal smell of horses everywhere, because horses are how everyone and everything moves, and horses produce roughly 20 to 30 pounds of manure each per day, which in a city of this size adds up to a lot. That's the morning in York in 1347. You've lived with it your entire life, so you don't notice it anymore, the way people who live near the sea stop smelling the salt. But on this particular morning, it hits you differently. Everything is sharper, more real. The way things become more real when you're about to leave them. You sit up in the bed. The mattress shifts and rustles. It's a good mattress, wool-stuffed and well-made, one of your father's small luxuries for his children, and across the room, in the truckle bed near the door, your nurse Margaret stirs. You're awake. I'm awake. A pause. You can hear her sit up, hear the soft protest of her joints. Are you afraid? You consider lying. Margaret has known you since you were an infant, so she would see through it immediately. Yes. Good, she says. That means you're paying attention. That is, in a very condensed form, the only useful piece of advice you will receive today about what you're about to enter into. Savour it. There won't be much more. The room fills slowly with better light. Margaret builds up the fire in the small hearth, and the cold that had settled into the room overnight, October in Yorkshire is not gentle, begins to retreat. The warmth comes in stages. First, the fire's immediate circle, hot enough to scorch if you're too close. then the slow radiance that spreads toward the bed, then, eventually, something approaching comfortable. Your mother comes in before the fire is fully caught. She's dressed already, her grey wool gown smooth and precise, her hair covered by a white wimple. She has the look of a woman who's been awake for hours doing organisational work and is now arriving to supervise the next stage of organisational work. Your mother is, by the standards of 1347 York, a successful woman. She married well. She runs a large household efficiently. She has produced 5 surviving children out of 8 pregnancies, which is a better ratio than many women her age. She's also, you will realise much later in life, a woman who was given almost exactly the same amount of information you're being given now. Up, she says. We need to get you dressed. Dressing in 1347 for a formal occasion is not a quick process. It is not the process of standing in front of your wardrobe for 20 minutes complaining that you have nothing to wear while objectively having dozens of options. It is not choosing between boots that go with the dress and boots that are actually comfortable. It is an hour-long procedure involving multiple garments layered in a specific order, requiring at least 2 other people because half the fastenings are in places you cannot reach yourself, producing a finished result that is simultaneously formal enough for the occasion and practical enough to be worn for 8 to 10 hours without catastrophic failure. And when I say catastrophic failure, I mean the kind that becomes a social story people tell for years. You start with the chemise, linen, fine woven, ankle length. This is the garment that actually touches your skin. Everything else layers over it. You put it on while the fire builds, still half in last night's sleep, and it's cold. Linen doesn't warm until your body warms it, and slightly scratchy at the collar, and it smells faintly of the lavender sachets your mother keeps in the linen chest. Over that, the coat hardy. This is your best one. Ordered 3 months ago when the betrothal was first being negotiated, made from a wool cloth dyed a deep blue-green that your mother spent 2 weeks selecting. The blue-green is significant. It means something. Sober enough to signal respectability, rich enough to signal wealth, unusual enough to be remembered. Your father deals in wool. He knows cloth. He knows what messages cloth sends. He has spent his entire professional life in a world where the weight and weave and colour of what you wear tells people your place in the hierarchy before you open your mouth. The coat hardy buttons from the elbow to the wrist, 32 small buttons down each forearm. And your mother does these herself, her fingers quick and precise from years of practice. The buttons are bone, carved and polished, small and white and cold to the touch. You stand still while she works. Keep your hands out, she says. You keep your hands out. You watch her face. Your mother is 41 years old. She looks older. 3 years ago she lost a pregnancy in the 5th month and was ill for weeks afterward, and something in her face changed with that. Something went quieter. You have never asked her about it. In 1347, you don't ask your mother about lost pregnancies. You don't ask about labour. You don't ask about the specifics of what happens on a wedding night, or what it means when your body does certain things, or whether it's supposed to hurt and for how long. You learn what you learn from inference, from overhearing, from the careful education in silence that mothers pass to daughters without ever quite speaking the words. The problem is that silence has gaps, big ones. Hold still, she says, adjusting something at your shoulder. You hold still. The coat hardy is closely fitted through the torso. This is the fashion, the silhouette that announces you are young and have a shape, and it presses against your ribs when you breathe too deeply. You learn within the first 5 minutes of wearing it to breathe in small increments, a skill you will use regularly for the next 20 years. Then the sideless surcoat over the top, the sleeveless outer layer that displays the blue-green beneath through its wide openings, and the belt, a woven silk belt, borrowed from your aunt because your family doesn't own one fine enough. And the shoes, leather dyed to match, pointed at the toe. Then your hair. Margaret does your hair. This is her territory. Your mother oversees, but Margaret acts, drawing the comb through length that reaches past your shoulder blades, working out the tangles from the night with a patience that she clearly does not feel but has learned to perform. It hurts. Every hair has an opinion about the direction it wants to go, and the comb disagrees, and your scalp is registering every single one of these negotiations. You don't wince. You learned not to wince years ago. Your hair is braided. 2 plaits wound with ribbons. The ribbons are silk purchased specifically for today, and then arranged under a small fitted cap with a white veil attached. The veil is new, still slightly stiff. It has a smell, something between the shop where it was purchased and the cedar of the chest it's been stored in. When you look at yourself in the polished metal of your mother's hand mirror, it's not glass, nothing like the mirrors you're familiar with. It's just a disc of highly polished metal that gives you back a slightly warped, slightly dark version of your face. You barely recognize yourself. You look well, your mother says. You're not sure if she means it, or if she's saying what needs to be said this morning. Mother. What is he like? Thomas Fitch? Really? Your mother is quiet for a moment, long enough that Margaret glances up from where she's folding linen on the other side of the room. He's a 3rd son, your mother says finally, which means he'll have to make his own way, which means he'll work hard. That's not a bad thing in a husband. That is not an answer to the question you asked. You know better than to push it. You go to church. That's where the betrothal ceremony happens. At the door of the church, technically, the formal exchange of vows before witnesses happens on the threshold, in public, before God and everyone on the street, before you move inside for the blessing. The walk from your father's house to All Saints' pavement is maybe 400 yards. In the ordinary course of life, you walk it in 5 minutes. Today, it takes considerably longer. Because today, you walk with your family. Your father in his best wool, dark red, his gold chain of guild membership heavy on his chest, your mother beside him, your 2 older brothers behind, various cousins and connections and witnesses who have come from around the city, some from further away, making up a procession that takes up most of the width of Goodram Gate. The street watches. York in 1347 has approximately 10,000 people, which sounds like nothing now, but is actually a significant city by 14th century standards. It is the 2nd city of England. It has the Minster, one of the grandest cathedrals in the country, and the merchant guilds, and the wool trade, and a complicated social hierarchy that knows everyone's business, and absolutely has opinions about it. People stop and look as you pass. Some of them know your family, some of them just recognise a betrothal procession and stop because it's something to look at on an October morning. You look at the street instead of looking at the people looking at you. You've walked this street your entire life. You know the crooked beam above the door of the candlemaker's shop, where the wood has warped over decades until it looks like it's trying to slide off the building. You know the particular smell of the bakery 2 doors down from the church where even This early the ovens are hot and there's a warm yeasty cloud coming out of the front door that you have to walk through. You know the puddle that never fully dries even in summer, collecting in the low spot where the paving stones have settled unevenly. These are the things you know. In 3 weeks you will leave them. That thought is abstract right now. It doesn't feel real. It keeps sliding away when you try to hold it, the way certain thoughts do when you're not ready for them. The church door appears, and there he is. Thomas Fitch is standing at the entrance with his father and 2 older brothers and a cluster of relatives you don't know, and he is taller than you remembered, and he is looking at you, and his expression is difficult to read, not cold, not warm, something careful and neutral in the way of a person who's been told to make a good impression and is concentrating on doing that. Your father steps forward. The priest steps between you, and it begins. The betrothal ceremony is not the wedding. That distinction matters. What happens today at the church door is the per verba de futuro promise, the formal commitment to marry in the future. What happens in 3 weeks is the per verba de presenti, the actual marriage vow. But here's something the church debates vigorously in 1347 and will argue about for another century. What exactly is the difference, legally and spiritually? Because if the betrothed couple sleeps together between the betrothal and the wedding, if the per verba de futuro is followed by consummation, then in the eyes of many theologians the marriage has already occurred. The ceremony becomes a formality. This is relevant information. Nobody tells you this. Thomas Fitch holds your right hand in his right hand. His hand is larger than yours, obviously. You're 15 and he's 24, and warm, and you can feel the calluses on his palm from whatever he does with his days. He's a knight's son, which means training with weapons, which leaves its marks. He is looking at you. You're looking at the priest. The priest reads the terms in Latin, which is the official language of the church, but not the language of approximately everyone present. So halfway through, he switches to English, because this is the 14th century, and the English are becoming increasingly insistent that English actually matters. The terms are: the Mercer family provides a dowry of 40 marks and various household goods to be specified. The Fitch family provides a dower, the portion Agnes Mercer will receive should she be widowed, of land in Lincolnshire valued at 1/3 of Thomas Fitch's holdings, your entire future financial security, summarised in 1 paragraph. You will not own that land if he dies. You will have the income from it. You will not be able to sell it or give it away or make major decisions about it. If you remarry, the arrangements become more complicated. If you don't remarry, you will depend entirely on the income from land controlled by your late husband's family, whose interests may or may not align with yours. This is called the dower system. It was designed to protect widows. It does, sort of, the way a fence with several large gaps protects a field. None of this is explained to you at the church door. The priest asks Thomas Fitch if he takes you as his future wife. "I do," Thomas says. His voice is lower than you expected, steady. The priest asks you if you take Thomas Fitch as your future husband. 30 years later, you will not be able to remember what you felt in that specific second. What you will remember is the weight of his hand around yours, the cold coming off the stone of the church doorway, the smell of the priest's incense, and underneath it the smell of York, coal, animals, bread, which is the smell of your whole life. "I do," you say. His hand tightens slightly round yours. The priest speaks the blessing. The witnesses sign or make their marks on the document. The clerk has prepared. Wine appears, your father arranged this, and is drunk in cups handed out to the people assembled. Thomas Fitch leans toward you, quietly, so only you can hear. "We should talk," he says, "before the wedding, if it pleases you." You look at him. His face is closer now, and you can see that his eyes are brown and that there's a small scar above his right eyebrow, thin and white, old enough to be unremarkable. "It would please me," you say. He nods once, releases your hand. You don't speak again that day. The families mix, the wine is drunk, the polite conversations happen around and over you. He is taken off by your father for the serious business conversations. You are taken off by his mother. His mother. This is, though you don't yet know it, the most important relationship of the next several years of your life. Her name is Lady Marjorie Fitch. She is 47. She runs the Fitch household at Heckington Manor. She has done so for 22 years. She runs it with a precision and authority that comes from 2 decades of practice and zero intention of relinquishing control. She looks you over the way you look over cloth at market, assessing weight and quality and likely durability. "You're small," she says. "I'm not finished growing," you say. A pause. Lady Marjorie Fitch almost smiles. Almost. "No," she agrees. "I don't suppose you are." 3 weeks. The weeks between the betrothal and the wedding are full. Your mother fills them. The household goods are assembled, the linens counted and pressed and packed into chests. The trousseau, your collection of personal items, clothing, small household objects, bedding, is prepared. Every item is listed in your mother's neat hand, because in case of widowhood or dispute, you will need to be able to prove what you brought to the marriage. You learn this. Everything in your married life will need to be proven. Nothing will simply be assumed. Thomas Fitch sends a message through the formal channels, through your father, that he hopes you are well. You send back through your father that you are well and hope the same for him. It is a completely absurd way to communicate with the person you're about to spend the rest of your life with, but it is also the correct way, the expected way, the way that signals to both families that this is being conducted with appropriate propriety. The 2 of you do not speak again before the wedding. Nobody thinks this is unusual. You think it is extremely unusual. You think about this a great deal in the small hours of several nights, lying awake while Margaret snores softly on her truckle bed. You are about to permanently relocate your entire existence. Your home, your family, your city, your name, to be with a person you have exchanged approximately 20 words with. You run through those words repeatedly, looking for information, for clues. "We should talk before the wedding. If it pleases you, it would please me. That's it." That's all you have. That's the portrait you're painting a life from. You fall asleep eventually and dream of nothing you can remember. The wedding morning, your eyes open to darkness. October has deepened. The cold in the room has weight to it now, the kind of cold that comes before frost that settles into stone walls and doesn't leave until spring. The smell this morning is different from the betrothal morning. Fuller. Because your mother has been cooking for 3 days. The servants have been cooking for 3 days, and the house is saturated with it. Roasting meat and pastry and the sweet spice smell of the wine being heated with cinnamon and ginger downstairs. And underneath all of that, underneath the food and the fire and the colder note of outside morning, something sharper, something your body knows before your mind does. You are afraid. Not of Thomas Fitch specifically, though there is that. Not of the ceremony which you have rehearsed in your head until you could do it, in your sleep. Afraid of the after. because after today you will be somewhere else. You will be someone else. You will be in a house in Lincolnshire that you have never seen, surrounded by people who are strangers, doing work you have never done in the way that strangers do it, with a man you don't know in a role you've never occupied, and you don't know enough about any of it to know what to be afraid of specifically. You know the ceremony. You know the words. You don't know what comes after the words. Margaret builds the fire. Your mother comes in. Your sisters, who you did not properly mention before, there are two of them, Eleanor, who is 12, and Joan, who is 8, come and stand in the doorway looking solemn and large-eyed in the way of children at important events they've been told to behave at. Come in or go out, your mother says without turning. They come in. The dressing today takes longer. Your wedding coat, Hardy, is new, crimson, the most expensive cloth your father has spent money on in recent years, a fine wool dyed with kermes, the insect-derived scarlet that requires more processing than any other colour and cost accordingly. The colour of blood, of royalty, of things that matter. Your father has spent money saying that you matter. You feel it as Margaret buttons you into it. The weight of the cloth, heavier than your everyday wool, the way it moves differently. There's a quality to good cloth that cheaper fabric doesn't have. It hangs better. It responds to movement more precisely. It does what it's supposed to do. There are pearls on the collar, 6 of them, borrowed from your aunt who borrowed them from her own betrothal, who borrowed them from a woman whose name nobody can now remember. The pearls are cold against your neck, small and slightly uneven in shape because natural pearls are never quite perfectly round. They have a weight that surprises you the first time you touch them, not heavy, just present, asserting themselves. Your hair is braided again today, but elaborately. Your mother has brought in a woman from across the street whose specialty is hair, and she works for nearly an hour, her hands nimble and sure, creating something that involves your own plaits wound through with the borrowed silk ribbons from the betrothal, plus a fresh white veil held with pins. When you look in the mirror this time, the version of you looking back is someone you won't be again after today. The last version of Agnes Mercer, the daughter. Tomorrow you will be Agnes Fitch, if you survive tonight. Nobody has actually told you what happens tonight. This is, in retrospect, a staggering failure of communication on the part of everyone involved in your upbringing. You know something happens. You know it involves the marriage bed and your husband, and that it produces, eventually over time, children. You know it is a duty of a wife. You know your mother did it and her mother did it, and this is how the world perpetuates itself. What you know about the specifics, at the age of 15, in 1347 England, could fit on a very small piece of parchment with room left over. Margaret catches your eye in the mirror. She opens her mouth, then your mother turns around. Margaret closes her mouth. And whatever Margaret was going to say, you will never know. The church. Not All Saints' pavement this time. All Saints is for the betrothal. The wedding is at the Minster. Your father has arranged this as a matter of status. The Minster is the cathedral, the grandest space in York, and your father is a man who understands that where you hold a ceremony communicates something about who you are. The Minster is enormous. You've been inside it many times, but it still does something to your chest every single time. Some adjustment your body makes in response to that much stone rising that far above your head. The nave is 160 feet long. The central tower is right now scaffolded. They're always building something, the Minster, always in the middle of some new ambition. But even scaffolded, it reaches up above the city like a statement. The Great East Window is underway. They started the glass in 1338, and they're still working on it. Eventually, when it's finished, it will be the largest expanse of medieval stained glass in England. Right now, it's only partially installed. Some panels complete, some spaces filled with temporary boarding, but even partial, even unfinished, the light coming through the sections of coloured glass transforms what's underneath it. Blue, green, gold, red like your dress. The light falls on the stone floor in coloured patches. You watch them as you walk. The ceremony. Thomas is there before you, standing at the altar. He's dressed in deep green, a colour they've chosen to work with your crimson. Your mother and his mother arranging this detail in communications you are not part of, and he is still tall and still has that careful, neutral expression. But when you walk toward him, he does something small and involuntary with his jaw that you file away without knowing what to do with. The priest speaks, Latin and English alternating. You say the words when it's time to say the words. I, Agnes, take thee, Thomas, to my wedded husband. The words feel large in your mouth, more significant than other words you've spoken. Or maybe that's just the stone around you, amplifying everything. He says his words. His voice doesn't waver. He's steady in the way that some people are steady. You note this. The ring goes on your finger. It's gold. Thin because he's a third son and gold costs money, but gold. Warm from where he's been holding it. It slides on with more ease than expected. When the priest pronounces you married, something settles in the air around you. Some new fact that wasn't there a moment ago. You are Agnes Fitch now. You look at your husband. He looks at you. Neither of you speaks. Outside, someone has arranged for bells to be rung. Your father. And the sound comes down through the stone of the minster and vibrates in the soles of your feet. The feast is in your father's hall. Your father's hall is large by the standards of a York merchant house. A main room 40 feet long with a high ceiling, trestle tables that have been set up and covered with linen, candles everywhere, the fireplace at the far end throwing heat and light in aggressive quantities. By the time you arrive from the minster, the feast is already assembled. Approximately 60 people, which is most of who was invited, and a few extras who arrived with people who were invited, because this is how it always works. The smell hits you at the door. Roast pork. There are 3 pigs on the spit, you can see them, and mutton in some kind of sauce, and the bread that's been baking, and the spiced wine, and 60 people in wool clothing in an enclosed space. All of it mixed together into something that is overwhelmingly, saturatingly feast. You sit at the high table, your husband beside you. His thigh is warm against yours. That is, you realize, the most physical contact you've had with another human being since you were a small child, and your father still carried you. Food is brought. In 1347, a wedding feast is an opportunity for the host to demonstrate wealth through excess. Not through the fancy minimalism of modern haute cuisine, the careful single scallop in a sea of white plate, but through abundance. Through there being more of everything than could possibly be consumed, through the waste being visible and intentional. First course, pottage, the thick vegetable soup that comes at the beginning of every serious meal, but this version is enriched with bone broth and has been cooked with herbs from the garden since yesterday. A loaf of bread for each pair of diners, white bread, not the rough brown bread of everyday life. White bread requires more work, costs more, proves something. Second course, the pork, roasted, until the fat runs and the skin is crackled hard and golden. sliced at the table by a servant with a long-bladed knife, served in pieces larger than you could possibly eat, accompanied by a thick sauce made from onions and the drippings. Between courses, music. Your father has hired a lute player and a man with a small drum. They play at the far end of the hall. The music is there the way background music is there, present enough to fill silence, unobtrusive enough that people talk over it. Thomas Fitch eats methodically, not greedily, not slowly, just steadily, attending to the food in front of him with the same careful neutrality he seems to bring to everything. You are barely eating. Your stomach is in a state that makes food less attractive than it usually is. You manage the pottage. You take some of the pork and arrange it on your trencher in a way that might look like eating. You're not hungry, he says. The first words he's spoken to you today, outside of the ceremony, I'm nervous, you say, because apparently all social filters leave when you're married and exhausted and slightly dizzy from the heat of the hall. So am I, he says. You look at him. He looks at you with an expression that is the most human thing you've seen on his face, which is, I am doing my best, and I'm also not entirely sure what I'm doing. Really, you say, I've never been married before either, which is obvious, but also somehow the most reassuring thing anyone has said to you all day. The feast continues. Various members of both families approach to offer congratulations, observations, pieces of advice, all of which wash over you at a level of abstraction that is not quite real. You say the right things. You smile in the right places. You hold Thomas's hand when it's expected, and you eat enough that it doesn't become notable. And you watch. You watch your mother across the room talking to Lady Marjorie Fitch. Two women conducting the serious negotiations behind the public celebration. Figuring out the practicalities of the handover, when you will leave, what will be sent separately, who will accompany you, what is expected from you when you arrive. You watch your father, who is drinking his own wine with the specific satisfaction of a man who has successfully completed a major transaction. His daughter is married. His alliance with the Fitch family is secured. The terms he negotiated are favourable. This is a good day for him. He loves you. You know this. And this is a good day for him. Both of those things are true simultaneously. You watch your little sisters, Eleanor and Joan, who are sitting together at a lower table and clearly having the best time of anyone in a room, sneaking extra sweetmeats and whispering to each other with the sustained energy of children who are up past their usual bedtime and know it. Joan catches your eye and waves. You wave back. Something catches in your chest. Not now. Not yet. Late in the evening, the candles burned low. The fire in the fireplace settled into deep glowing coals, the feast gradually becoming quieter as the wine did its work on 60 people. The moment arrives. The bedding ceremony. And I need to stop here and explain something to you, because the bedding ceremony is one of those medieval practices that modern people find either horrifying or hilarious or both. And I want you to understand it within its own context before you make a judgment about it. The consummation of a marriage in 1347 is legally required for the marriage to be fully valid. An unconsummated marriage can be dissolved. Impotence is grounds for annulment. The Church has opinions about all of this, and those opinions are encoded in law. And that law has real consequences for real people. So the community, the witnesses, the family, the guests, has a legitimate interest, as they understand it, in knowing that the marriage is actually going to be consummated, that the couple actually goes to bed together, that the transaction is complete. Hence, the bedding ceremony, which means that approximately 40 of your 60 wedding guests are currently in the room where you're about to spend your first night as a married woman, watching you and your new husband be escorted to bed. Your mother-in-law removes your veil. The women of the party help you into bed, into a nightgown that has been warmed by the fire, into sheets that smell of the herbs, lavender, rosemary, that your mother tucked between them when she prepared the bed. On the other side of the bed, the men are doing the same for Thomas. You do not look. You stare at the canopy above you. The priest comes forward and blesses the bed. More Latin. He sprinkles something with a small brush. Holy water, you think. Someone makes a joke. Several people laugh. You stare at the canopy. And then, blessedly, finally, after what seems like a very long time, everyone leaves. The door closes. Silence. The candle on the bedside stand is small and burnt low. It gives light for perhaps another hour. The fire in the small hearth across the room is the only other light, orange and shifting. Thomas Fitch is in the bed beside you. You can feel the warmth of him, the particular way the mattress distributes two people's weight. You're very aware of being in a bed with a person you do not know, and of the specific strangeness of that. He's quiet for a moment. Then he says, "Are you all right?" It's not quite a question. It's more careful than a question. "I don't know what to expect," you say. Honestly. Because apparently today's the day for honesty. Thomas is quiet. "I'll try to..." He stops, starts again. "I won't be rough." Which is, you will come to understand, a meaningful promise in the context of 1347 England and what a husband legally can do. A husband's authority over his wife's body is essentially complete in the eyes of the law. What he is telling you is that he intends to exercise that authority carefully. This is not the same as love. It is not the same as your modern concept of consent and mutual desire, and the entire framework that sexual ethics will take centuries to build. But it is something. It is the something that the law does not require of him, that nobody in his upbringing would have insisted on, that he is offering because you will spend a long time wondering why, what in his character or experience or beliefs produces that particular offer. The candle burns. I'm going to leave the wedding night here. Not because nothing happened. Something did. Well, the biology of the world proceeds regardless. But because what matters in the context of what you were never told is not the mechanics of what happens in that bed. What matters is the morning. What matters is what comes after. Your eyes open to light. For a moment, not even a moment, a fragment of a moment, everything is fine. You're just Agnes waking up before the body of the man beside you moves and exhales and the entire situation returns in full, not with fear. That's the strange thing, with something stranger than fear, something that doesn't have a clean name. You're in a rented room in an inn on the south side of York, which is where Thomas and his family have been staying, which is where you will stay tonight and tomorrow night before the Fitch party begins the journey back to Lincolnshire. The room is small, a plank floor, cold, a window with the shutter only partially closed, letting in grey October morning and the smell of the street below, which is a different street and a different neighbourhood than you grew up in, but also York, and therefore the same compound smell of coal and river and animals. Thomas is awake. He is lying still with his eyes open, looking at the ceiling, and he turns his head when you move. You look at each other. No script exists for this moment. No instruction has been given for what to say to the person who is now your husband in the first morning light of your first married day. The ceremony covered the before. Nobody covered the after. Good morning, he says. Good morning, you say. A pause. Are you hungry? Yes, you say, surprised to find it's true. He gets up. He is not self-conscious about this in the way you might expect, but he's 24 and he grew up in a household with brothers and shared sleeping quarters and the general physical unself-consciousness of men who have spent years training with weapons and living in close proximity to other men. You are more careful. You find your chemise, your coat hardy. You do what you can about your hair without Margaret, which is limited. He comes back from wherever he went, speaking to someone downstairs apparently, and a servant brings bread and small beer and a bowl of something warm that turns out to be pottage. You eat together, in silence mostly, but not an uncomfortable silence, a new silence. The silence of two people figuring out the shape of each other. Heckington, he says, at some point. Tell me about it, he does. Heckington Manor his family's holding. The house, stone-built, old, larger than it needs to be for the people who currently live in it. The land, fields, pasture, a mill on the stream to the east, the village nearby, maybe 200 souls, the household, his parents, his 2 older brothers and their wives, various servants and farm workers. You listen, you're going to live there. All of that is your life now. You're hearing it for the first time as a list of facts instead of feeling it as a reality. And the gap between those two things is very large. Your mother runs the house, you say. Yes. A pause. She's good at it. You hear what's underneath that. She's not going to immediately step aside for you, which you had already deduced from the 47 years of experience and the way she looked at you at the betrothal. I'll learn, you say. He looks at you. Something in his face. That small movement in his jaw again. I know, says. The journey from York to Heckington takes 3 days. On horseback, which you have done, you can ride. This is part of your education, but not for 3 consecutive days, and not through the specific geographic reality of Lincolnshire in late October. Let me describe Lincolnshire in late October. Flat, more flat than you have ever seen land be. You grew up in York, which has hills, and the elevated presence of the Minster and the general visual interest of a city. Lincolnshire, specifically the fens, the marshy lowlands in the south and east of the county, is flat in the way of something that has never been informed that elevation exists. Sky everywhere. The sky in Lincolnshire is enormous. It's not that the sky is bigger, obviously, but the absence of anything vertical means you're aware of the sky from horizon to horizon, and in late October that sky is grey in approximately 6 different shades of grey, layered from the pale grey at the horizon through the dark grey of the approaching clouds to the blue-grey directly overhead. And it is wet. Not raining exactly. That would be too clean a word for what it is. It is damp in the comprehensive way of a landscape that is partly drainage channels, and partly managed water, and partly just undecided about whether it wants to be land or river at any given moment. The road is mud. Real mud. The kind of mud that develops opinions about your horse's hooves and doesn't let go. Every step the horses take produces a sound, a thick sucking release. And they slow. Everything slows. You can feel the cold through your riding cloak. Your hands in their leather gloves are cold in the specific way that suggests the cold has gotten through the leather and is now working on your actual skin. Your nose is running. Your toes in their pointed shoes, beautiful for a ceremony, not designed for 3 days of autumn riding, are numb by the first afternoon. "We can stop early," Thomas says, riding beside you. He's been watching you without appearing to watch you, which you will learn is something he does. "I'm fine," you say, because you are 15 and you have not yet learned that claiming to be fine when you're freezing and miserable accomplishes nothing useful. "We can stop early," he says again, not pressing, just leaving it there. You stop early. The inn is a low building, 1 story, smelling of hay and ale, and the smoke from a fire that doesn't entirely stay in its hearth. The room is small and shared, not with strangers, but with Thomas's older brother William and his wife, a partition of hanging cloth, creating the illusion of privacy. The partition is not very effective at illusion, but there is a fire, and there is warm soup, and at some point the mud on your shoes dries enough to be scraped off. You sleep that second night with your back against Thomas's chest, his arm over your waist. It is practical. The room is cold, and also something else, something you don't have a word for, yet. In the morning, the cold is even deeper. 3 days of this. On the 4th morning you ride through the village of Heckington and up the lane to the manor house, and you see, for the first time, the place where the rest of your life will happen. It's stone. That's the first thing you notice coming from York, where most buildings, even prosperous ones, are timber-framed. The manor house at Heckington is grey limestone, old enough that the corners have rounded slightly and moss has established itself in the lower courses. Not large, not a castle. 2 stories plus a loft, a hall and service rooms and private chambers above, a yard to the side with the kitchen building separate. Always separate in a medieval manner because fire and the stables and outbuildings beyond. It is a house that looks like it has been there for a very long time, and expects to be there for a very long time more. The door opens before you've dismounted. Lady Marjorie Fitch is in the doorway. She was expecting you. She's been expecting you, you learn later, since the first morning of your marriage, which was when she began reorganising certain practical arrangements at Heckington to account for your arrival. She's a woman who plans ahead. She looks at you the same way she looked at you at the betrothal, that assessing look. But there is something different in it now. You're not a candidate anymore. You're here. You're real. Now the question is what to do with you. "Come inside," she says. "You need to eat something. You look half frozen." This is not warmth exactly, but it is competence. It is the recognition that you are cold and need food, and an immediate action to address that. You will learn to read this as Lady Marjorie's version of care. The hall inside is warm. The fire has been burning all day. The smell is wood smoke and something savoury, a stew of some kind, and the particular indoor smell of a house that has been lived in by many people over many years. You are introduced in quick succession to 2 household servants whose names you immediately lose because you're too cold and overwhelmed. The cook, a heavy-set woman named Ellen, who's been with the Fitch household for 20 years and has very clear opinions about how the kitchen is run. A young woman named Maud, who will be your personal servant assigned to you, and the steward, an older man named Henry who manages the estate accounts. Everyone looks at you. You are the new wife, the incoming body, the person who will, eventually in some form, alter the power structures of this household simply by existing in it. None of them are hostile. Some of them are cautious. Some are curious. One of the household servants, an older woman, has an expression that might be kindness, or might be the specific wariness of someone who has seen brides come before. "Your room," Lady Marjorie says, and leads you upstairs. The room is not bad. Small, stone-walled, which is cold but solid. A window overlooking the yard, which is not the most attractive view but admits light. A bed, a good bed, feather-stuffed, with linen sheets and a wool coverlet. A chest for your belongings, pegs on the wall. "I've put lavender in the sheets," Lady Marjorie says, standing in the doorway. "Thank you," you say. A pause. "You'll want to learn the household," she says, not a question. "I do want to learn it," you say. "I want to learn how you do things. I'm not here to—" You stop. Find the right words. "I know this is your house. I'm not trying to change what works." Lady Marjorie Fitch looks at you for a long moment. "Sit down," she says. "I'll have Maud bring you something to eat and we'll talk." You sit down. What follows is not a warm conversation, but it is honest, which is more valuable. She tells you the household routine, which is established and efficient and not to be casually altered. The accounts, which Henry manages but which she reviews weekly. The servants, their particular strengths and particular difficulties. The kitchen, which is Ellen's domain entirely, and don't try to change Ellen's methods or you'll lose the best cook in the county. She tells you what Thomas likes to eat, which is a detail so practical and human, it surprises you coming from this woman. She tells you which of the farms is having trouble with the drainage. There is always drainage trouble in Lincolnshire, and which of the tenants can be trusted, and which of them will test your patience. She tells you almost everything. Almost. "When you're ready," she says, "I'll show you the still room." The still room, where the household medical supplies are made, where the herbs from the garden are dried and prepared into salves, syrups, poultices, where the woman of the house, traditionally, structurally, the woman of the house, has the knowledge that can mean the difference between someone in the household surviving something or not. "Tomorrow," she says, "you should rest today." You rest, but not easily. 3 weeks pass. You're learning the household the way you learn to walk, by falling repeatedly and getting up again, and eventually, gradually, not falling quite so often. The mornings start in the dark. Winter is coming fast, and in Lincolnshire, fast has a different quality than in York. In York, winter means cold streets and more smoke and the Minster looking very white against a grey sky. In Lincolnshire, winter means... Actually, let me explain Lincolnshire winter. The wind comes off the North Sea without anything to stop it. Not hills, not trees in any meaningful quantity, not buildings arranged in the ways that cities use to break the wind. It comes across the flat miles of the fens and hits the manor house with an authority that makes the timber of the shutters vibrate. At night, you can hear it in the walls, not like a ghost story, just like physics, air pressure, the world doing what wind does. The cold is different from York cold. In York, the cold collected in the stone streets and the narrow alleys, and you could duck into a bakery or a covered market and get warm again. Here, the cold is everywhere. Ambient. You are in it from the moment you step outside until the moment you're back inside by the fire. Your hands are taking the worst of it. You are not a woman with rough hands before this. You had worked with your hands. You are not a woman of leisure. Your father's household had plenty to do. But not this work. Not the grinding specifics of managing a medieval manor household. The morning begins with the fire, which needs wood from the woodpile, which is outside. The water, which needs fetching from the well in the yard. The milk, which needs to come from the dairy. All of this is servants' work, technically. But you are learning it because Lady Marjorie believes you should understand what you're overseeing before you oversee it. You agree with her, in principle. In practice, your hands by December are red and cracked. At the knuckles, the skin split in the places where it bends, and you rub them each night with the salve from the stillroom that Lady Marjorie has shown you to make. Rendered fat, lard mostly, infused with chamomile and calendula, poured into small clay pots sealed with cloth. It helps. It doesn't fully help. The cold will keep doing this to your hands until April, the stillroom. This is where you're spending more and more of your mornings because Lady Marjorie is teaching you and you are learning with an attention that surprises you both. The stillroom is a small room off the hall, stone-shelved, containing dried herbs hanging from the rafters, brown and rustling and labelled in Lady Marjorie's precise hand, clay jars of preparations, bundles of wax, a small still for extracting essences, measuring spoons, a mortar and pestle, the stone worn smooth from decades of use, the herbs, lavender, rosemary, thyme, chamomile, yarrow, plantain, comfrey, mugwort, St. John's wort, various others, each one with a use, a preparation method, a dosage. What they're used for: fever, wound cleaning, pain, digestion, headache, difficult monthly cycles, the 100 small things that go wrong with human bodies in the ordinary course of life. What the stillroom essentially is, the household's medical facility. In 1347, the nearest trained physician is in Lincoln, which is 20 miles away, and his fees are beyond what most people spend on medicine, and his treatments are, honestly, of variable quality. What a physician does in 1347 includes a significant amount of bloodletting and uroscopy, and balancing the 4 humours based on Galenic theory that has been in circulation for over 1,000 years and is confidently wrong about many things. What Lady Marjorie does in the stillroom, empirical knowledge passed from women to women over generations, based on observation and careful record-keeping, is often more effective, but that knowledge has a gap in it that you won't notice until you need it. For fever in children, Lady Marjorie says, crushing dried willow bark with the mortar, you steep this in water for a while and make a tea. Not too strong. Children's bodies can't handle. She stops measuring, but they need less than adults. You write this down in the small book you've started keeping. Observations, things to remember. And for what you're eventually going to need, Lady Marjorie says, with a precise bluntness that is her way of introducing difficult topics. We'll talk about that when the time comes. What she means, childbirth. What she means is she will tell you when you're pregnant. What she means is that the information you need for the most dangerous thing that will happen to you in the next several years will be given to you, because this is how it is given, at the last possible moment. You write willow bark in your notebook and think about asking directly. You don't ask. You don't know how. Thomas. You are learning Thomas. Fitch in the specific way you learn someone when you didn't know them before you married them. Not the way you learn a person through months of choice, noticing things about them and building a picture, but the accelerated, compressed, intimate version. Learning him in all dimensions simultaneously because you're sharing a bed and a table and a room and every decision of daily life. What you learn, he is careful in all things. He approaches problems by circling them, gathering information, deciding slowly. This is sometimes frustrating when you want an answer quickly, and occasionally very reassuring when the answer matters. He is the kind of quiet that is not absence but listening. He watches more than he talks. When he does talk, it's usually precise. No excess, nothing decorative. He's kind to the servants. This matters to you more than you expected. He has a temper. You discover this in the 3rd week, When one of the tenants comes with a dispute about drainage, always the drainage, and says something about Lady Marjorie in a way that is not quite respectful. Thomas's face changes, just briefly. Something comes up from underneath the careful neutral expression, something hot and controlled, and he says something very quiet and very flat to the tenant, and the tenant changes his tone immediately. After the tenant leaves, Thomas's face returns to normal. If it was frightening, you don't have context yet to know whether to be frightened. What you notice is the control, the return. You think about this. He has not raised his voice at you. He has not. You think about what your mother said. A third son. He'll have to make his own way. You think about what Lady Marjorie has not said about her son, which is as informative as what she has. You decide you will keep watching. In December, there is a night when it is very cold and neither of you can sleep, and you lie awake in the dark talking in the low voices people use at night, and he tells you about his childhood, the older brothers, the particular position of the third son, below the heir, below the spare, in the third position that means you will inherit nothing and must therefore become something on your own. He was sent to train as a knight because that was the obvious path. He is competent at it. He has no great love for it. What would you have been, you ask, if it wasn't that? He's quiet for a moment. A steward, maybe. Someone who manages accounts. I'm good at numbers. You're the son of a knight who would rather be a steward. And you're the daughter of a wool merchant who knows cloth better than most traders 3 times your age. A pause. I watched you with William's wife, looking at her sleeves. You had been. William's wife, Elizabeth, was wearing a blue wool that was cheaper than it looked but had been dyed to compensate for it, and you could see from the way the colour sat on the weave that it would fade unevenly in the first washing. Was it obvious? To me, you lie there in the dark of the Lincolnshire winter and something small shifts. Something you won't be able to name for a long time. The word you're groping toward is known. The feeling of being seen accurately by someone is a particular feeling, different from being seen favourably or seen partially. You're not sure yet what to do with it. January. The cold is at its worst in January. The ground is frozen hard enough that the well handle has to be thawed before it turns, and the wood in the wood pile splits cleanly along the grain without effort, and the breath of the horses in the stable hangs in the air for seconds after they exhale. You have been at Heckington for 3 months. You know the household. The morning routine lives in your body now. The fire, the water, the dairy, the accounts review with Henry on Tuesdays, the still-room work with Lady Marjorie on Thursdays. You know the sound of the wind in the walls before a storm comes. You know which step on the main staircase creaks and that it's the 4th one, not the 5th. You know Thomas's sleeping patterns. He sleeps heavily once he's asleep, but wakes fully at any unusual sound. Something in him that doesn't fully turn off. A vigilance. In the mornings he wakes with purpose, immediately present. No transition needed. You are the opposite. You surface from sleep slowly, require time, are useless until the fire is built and there is something warm to drink. He has started, without comment, building the fire before you're fully awake. You notice this without saying anything about it. The body. Your body is doing something. January 3rd week, and the specific thing that happens monthly, which you have had reliably since you were 13, does not happen. You notice. You file it. You wait. February. It still does not happen. Something else happens instead. In the mornings, in the period between waking and the fire being properly built and your blood warming up enough to function, There is a sensation, a wrongness in your stomach that isn't quite pain and isn't quite nausea, but is somewhere between the two, occupying a space in your body that doesn't have a name yet in your experience. You get up, you go to the window, you breathe the cold air through the shutter crack. It helps, slightly. This happens every morning for a week. On the 8th morning, Maud, who has been your personal servant for 3 months and who is a skis, brings you a cup of something warm without being asked. Ginger tea. The smell of ginger rising in the steam. You look at her. She looks back at you with an expression of professional neutrality that contains an enormous amount of knowledge. "Thank you," you say. "Of course, my lady," she says, "and that is how you learn you are pregnant. Not from a physician, not from Lady Marjorie, not from Thomas, from your servant handing you ginger tea with a look that says, 'I know what this is. I've seen it before. Here is something that helps.' The practical transmission of knowledge from woman to woman that bypasses every formal channel. You drink the tea. Your stomach settles slightly, and then you think, 'I am going to have a child.' The thought is large, too large to fit comfortably inside your head. You keep trying to hold it, and it keeps sliding sideways. 'I am going to have a child, a person, a whole person.' Currently, if Maud is right, if the timeline is what you think it is, currently very small, smaller than anything you can imagine, growing in the dark of your body without your input or consent. You've seen pregnant women before, you've seen births before in the distant way of a child, kept out of the room but aware of the sounds. You know what it looks like at the end. You do not know what happens in between. You do not know what the 9 months contain, what the body does, what demands it makes, what it takes from you. Nobody told you. The first thing you learn is that the body doesn't ask permission. It just begins. March. Your waist is not yet changed, or barely, but your body is doing things that have nothing to do with your waist. The smell of certain foods becomes an offence against your entire existence. Ellen's method of cooking pork, her standard method, the same one she's used for 20 years, is now capable of sending you out of the hall at speed. This does not make for smooth relations with Ellen. You're constantly tired in a way that is different from the tired of hard work. This is a deeper tired, a cellular tired. You sleep 8 hours and wake up needing to sleep more. And the ginger tea which Maud makes for you every morning, which helps, which is, and this is the strange thing, the thing you'll think about later, a piece of knowledge that exists entirely in the informal women's chain. Lady Marjorie knows it. Maud knows it. Ellen knows it. Your mother knew it. Nobody wrote it in a book. Nobody taught it in a school. It passes from woman to woman in the form of cups, of tea brought at the right moment. Lady Marjorie comes to find you on the 2nd day of March. You're in the still room, which has become your place. The small room where you have something specific to do with your hands, and where the smell of dried herbs is clean and complex and doesn't make you ill. She stands in the doorway. "Maud tells me," she says. "Yes." She nods. Something in her face shifts, an adjustment you can't quite read. "We should talk," she says, and she does. She talks for almost 2 hours, and what she says is more information about what is happening in your body than you have received in the 15 years of your life before this moment. She tells you the stages, the 9 months, what the body does in each of them, what to expect and what to not be afraid of, which is a slightly different category because there are things that will happen that are alarming but normal, and things that are alarming and not normal and you need to know the difference. She tells you what to eat. More than you think. Your body is building something and it requires material, the bread, the meat, the dairy, the specific things, liver, certain herbs, dried fruit, that she will make sure you have. She tells you the things to avoid, the specific heavy lifting that is now no longer your responsibility. The particular herb in the still room, the pennyroyal, third shelf on the left, that must not be taken in large quantities during pregnancy because it causes contractions. She's very precise about this. She tells you, the midwife. Her name is Alice Thornton. She lives in the village. She's attended 37 births and lost. Lady Marjorie pauses. You can see her doing something internal. 6 mothers. 6 out of 37. You do the mathematics. 1 in 6. Actually, let me give you the real numbers for 1347. Maternal mortality in medieval England varies enormously by who you are and where you are and whether you have access to a good midwife and whether complications arise. The overall rate that historians estimate is somewhere between 1 and 2% per birth, which sounds low until you account for the number of times a medieval woman gives birth. If you have 6 pregnancies, your cumulative risk over your reproductive life of dying in childbirth is somewhere between 6 and 12%. 1 in 10, 1 in 17, depending on the calculation. And those are the averages, which means some women faced much worse odds. Women in cities, women without good midwives, women with particular complications, obstructed labour, hemorrhage, puerperal fever, faced risks that were catastrophic. The knowledge of this is in Lady Marjorie's voice, not as terror, but as information. She's telling you the risks the way a sailor tells a new crew member about the currents. Here is where it gets dangerous. Here is what to watch for. Here is what we do if it goes wrong. You're young, she says. Your body is made for this. Most first labours are difficult, but you're healthy, and you've been eating well since you came. She looks at you. But you should know that it can go wrong, and if it goes wrong, we need Alice Thornton here quickly. You absorb this. And if it goes very wrong, you say. She's quiet for a moment. Then we pray, she says, and we do everything we know how to do, and most of the time that's enough. Most of the time, you pick up the mortar and begin grinding the dried chamomile because your hands need something to do, and Lady Marjorie stays in the still room with you for a while longer, not talking, just present. This is, you will understand much later, a form of love. April, the cold breaks. Not warmly. Lincolnshire doesn't do warm easily, but the specific murderous quality of the winter cold retreats. The ice in the well thaw. The birds return to the hedgerows. The fields, which have been brown and grey since October, show the first suggestion of green along the field edges where the drainage channels run. Your body is changing visibly now. There's a period, somewhere in the middle months of pregnancy, where your body is asserting itself in ways that are both completely outside your experience and somehow absolutely familiar, as if the knowledge has always been there, encoded in older knowledge, the movement. April 18th, morning, still room, grinding lovage root for a digestive preparation, and something moves. Your hand stops. You hold still. Again, a flutter, deep and interior. The very specific sensation. No other sensation is like it, and you will spend weeks afterward trying to describe it to yourself. Of something other than you moving inside you. You stand there with the mortar in your hands and your whole attention folded inward. A kick, unmistakable. Your eyes fill for reasons that you don't fully understand. Not sadness, not exactly happiness, something more fundamental than either. This is real. This is a person. This is not abstract anymore. You set down the mortar carefully. You press your hand flat against your abdomen. You wait. Another movement. There you are, you say out loud in the empty still room. May. Thomas knows, obviously. You told him in March, as soon as Lady Marjorie and you had your conversation. He received the news with the stillness that lasted long enough for you to wonder what he was thinking, and then he said something so practical it was almost funny. You should eat more at supper. I know, you said. A pause. Are you... He stopped, started again. Are you well? I'm well, you said. He looked at you with a look that means he's doing the internal calculation, adding up what he observes against what he knows. Then he nodded. That night he came back from the estate work earlier than usual. He sat with you by the fire while you worked on the embroidery project you've started. A panel for one of the altar cloths, fine linen with silk thread, something that requires concentration and patience and gives your hands something exact to do. He sat and he read from a book of chronicles that his father keeps in the study. It was quiet. The fire moved. Outside, the February wind worked on the walls. He said nothing about the pregnancy. He didn't need to. His being there was the thing. You thought, I married someone, not a transaction, not a stranger. Someone. You're still learning him. You'll be learning him for years. But the person coming into focus through the months at Heckington is not the face at the altar that you catalogued for information. It's someone more complicated. Someone who uses silence more than words. Someone whose anger burns cold and controlled. Someone who knows the weight of being the third son and the thing that knowledge made him. Someone who builds the fire before you're fully awake, because he noticed, without comment, that you need warming before you can function. In May, he comes back from a trip to Lincoln with something small wrapped in cloth. A comb, carved, bone, fine teeth. You've been making do with a comb with 2 broken teeth for 6 months. He hands it to you without ceremony. The old one isn't working, he says, and goes out. You hold the comb in your hands for a long moment. This is a man saying, I see you, in the only language he has for it. June. News arrives from the south. It comes through various channels, merchants, travellers, a letter from your father, and the news is this. There is a pestilence, not in England yet, on the continent, in France, in Italy, in the trading ports of the Mediterranean, ships arriving at southern ports carrying dying men, a sickness that moves faster than anything recorded, a sickness that takes you in 4 days and leaves marks on the body, swellings in the groin and armpit the size of eggs, blackening under the skin that no one has seen before. The pestilence, the Black Death, though nobody calls it that yet. They call it by various names in various languages. The mortality, the great dying. The Fitch household receives this news with the serious attention that people give to catastrophic information from a distance, serious enough to discuss, far enough away to not yet be terror. Henry, the steward, calculates what it might mean for trade if the wool markets in Italy are disrupted. Sir Robert, Thomas's father, thinks it will not reach England because England has the sea between it and the continent. Lady Marjorie listens to all of this and says nothing. You watch her face when the news is discussed. She looks like a woman who is doing mathematics. Afterward, in the still room, she begins laying in extra stocks of certain herbs. Specifically, Herbs associated in the medical tradition with pestilence. Aromatic herbs, the ones that were believed to protect against bad air. Vinegar, which can be used to wash. She doesn't explain, she prepares. You help her, because you've been helping her in the still room for months now, and you understand without asking that this is a precaution against a possibility she believes is more likely than Sir Robert does. Mother, you say one evening. You've started calling her that. She didn't ask you to. You did it once, tentatively, in April, and she looked at you for a moment with an expression that contained something, and then continued what she was saying. What have you heard? You say. What I've told you. What do you think? She's measuring dried sage into a small crock. Her hands are steady. They're always steady. I think the sea is not as wide as Robert believes, she says, and I think we should be prepared. She seals the crock with cloth, and I think you should stay in the house as much as possible until after the child comes. You're 6 months pregnant. You're not going far in any case, but you understand her meaning. You stay closer to the house. You stop going to the village market which Thomas takes over. When travellers pass, they receive food and drink from Maud at the gate rather than being invited inside. The summer passes in a kind of anxious stillness. News continues to arrive, each letter darker than the last. August. The heat is... I want you to understand what August heat is like in a medieval house in Lincolnshire when you're 8 months pregnant. There is no way to cool down. There is no ice. Ice is a luxury for the wealthy in summer, and even then only briefly. There is no shade that isn't itself warm. The stone of the house holds heat during the day and radiates it at night. The fire in the kitchen never fully goes out because food must be cooked, and heat from the kitchen radiates. You're carrying a child who has, at this point, opinions about where to put its knees and elbows, and those opinions frequently intersect with your ribs. You sleep badly. You're uncomfortable in ways that precede language. You're so tired that tiredness has become the baseline state of your existence, and you are afraid. Not the abstract afraid of March when it was still early and the pregnancy was new. This is the concrete afraid of a woman who now knows enough to know what is coming, who has read every entry in Lady Marjorie's still-room records about complications and preparations, who has met Alice Thornton and has been reassured by Alice Thornton's competence and is still afraid, because competence is not the same as guarantee. Thomas can tell. He doesn't ask. He doesn't press. What he does is, he stays closer than usual. He comes back from the estate work before dark. He finds things to do in the house in the evenings, small repairs and adjustments, things that keep him within earshot. You notice. I'm not going to die, you tell him one evening at supper, because the silence around the subject has gotten large enough to have its own presence. He looks up from his food. No, he says, you're not. A pause. But I am afraid, you say. I want you to know that. He sets down his spoon. So am I, he says. Same words as the wedding night. I'm nervous too, and later, so am I. You have married a man who will tell you his fear when you tell him yours. This is not nothing. This is, in the context of 1347 and men, and the various ways men have of responding to the fear of women, quite a lot. Alice will be here, you say. Yes. Lady Marjorie will be here. Yes. Maud. Yes. You're listing the people who will be there, and the list is the same thing as the prayer, and the prayer is the same thing as, please let this be enough. The labour begins on a Tuesday morning in the first week of September. You wake before dawn knowing something is different. Not pain, not yet. A different quality of feeling in your body. A heaviness that has changed into something else. Something that has intention in it. You lie still for a moment in the way you've learned to lie still before acting, gathering information. Another feeling, stronger, a tightening that starts at your back and comes around to the front, building over about 30 seconds and then releasing. You wake Maud. Maud sends for Alice Thornton. Alice arrives within the hour, travelling in the grey light of early morning, her bag of instruments and preparations over her arm. She's a small woman, plain-faced, with hands that are square and very sure. She looks at you, asks you several questions, examines you with the brisk efficiency of someone who does this often, and says, "It started. First baby, so it'll be a while. Let's get you comfortable." Getting comfortable in 1347 labour is a relative concept. There is a specific bed in the household, the birthing bed, low and firm, set in a specific position. There are linens that have been prepared. There is the fire built up hot. There are the preparations Alice carries. Oil for anointing, certain herbs in ready form for specific situations. Lady Marjorie is there, Maud is there, Alice is there, 2 other women from the household whose specific role is to be additional hands. Thomas is not there. Men are not present at medieval births. This is not a cruelty, though it occasionally produces cruel results when complications arise quickly. It is the convention. Birth is women's work, women's space, women's knowledge. Thomas waits in the hall below. You know he's there. You can hear, distantly, his footsteps occasionally. The specific pattern that means he's pacing. The hours pass. I need to describe this honestly. Labour in 1347 is not quick, especially not a first labour. The hours accumulate. The contractions, and the word contraction is correct physiologically. What your uterus is doing is exactly that. A muscular action that is more powerful than any muscle you can consciously control, build in intensity and frequency over the course of the day. By mid-morning they are strong enough that you grip the side of the birthing bed with both hands. The sensation is... There is no comfortable way to describe this. It is pain, yes. A very specific kind of pain, the kind that doesn't come from injury or illness, but from your body doing something it was designed to do, something enormous and mechanical, and the pain is both the evidence that it's working and the substance of working. You breathe through it because Alice tells you to breathe through it, and because breathing through it is the one thing you can actively do, and you need something to do. You're doing well, Alice says, at various intervals. You notice that she says this regardless of what's happening. You will understand later that this is technique, that saying you're doing well is doing something is a form of medicine, but in the moment you notice it and file it away. Lady Marjorie does not say you're doing well. Lady Marjorie says nothing. She moves quietly and efficiently, doing whatever Alice asks for, keeping the fire, keeping track. Her silence is different from Thomas's silence. Thomas's silence has warmth in it. Lady Marjorie's silence has concentration. Maud, hold your hand. She's been holding your hand for most of the day. Her grip is steady. She doesn't flinch when you grip back harder than you mean to. Noon comes. The afternoon. The contractions are very strong now. The intervals between them are short. It's getting closer, Alice says. I need you to... What she needs you to do is the specific work of the final stage. The pushing work, which is simultaneously the hardest thing you've ever done physically, and the thing your body is most urgently insisting on. You do what Alice says. You're not thinking about anything. The news from the south about the pestilence, Thomas in the hall below, your mother in York, the wedding morning, the pearls cold against your neck, the moment at the church door. All of it is gone. There is only this room, this fire, this pain that has become so fundamental. It is just the medium you exist in. Alice's voice is very calm. Lady Marjorie moves to your other side. Agnes. Her voice saying your name, not my lady, not your title. Agnes, look at me. You look at her. Her face is close. She's holding your hand, has taken your hand, on the other side from Maud. You're going to be all right, she says. Not the midwife's professional reassurance, something else. This is a woman who has done this, who has stood where you are standing, and who is telling you something she knows. One more, Alice says. Really push now. Really. And so you do. The cry is the thing. Your own voice. Distantly. Alice's voice. Something specific and urgent, instructions you can't process. Maud's hand tightening on yours. And then another sound. Higher. Thinner. Coming from somewhere new. The child. Your child. You're lying back in the birthing bed, which is soaked and blood-hot and the most exhausted you've ever been in your life. And the sound is there in the room with you, and Alice is saying something, and Lady Marjorie is doing something, and you are trying to understand what has just happened. A girl, Alice says. She puts the child on your chest. The child is red-faced and wet and absolutely furious, as though the world she's been forced into has already deeply offended her, and she is tiny. You did not understand how tiny. You understood it intellectually, but not in your body. And she weighs nothing, and she weighs everything. She grabs your finger. Her grip is... Nothing in your life has prepared you for that grip. So strong, for something so small, an absolute insistence on presence. You look at her and she looks at you, or looks in your direction with eyes that don't quite focus yet, and the room is still happening around you. Alice is still working, Lady Marjorie is still present, Maud is crying quietly, which you notice in the far distance, but none of it is quite real except this small person, who exists because you existed, whose life depends entirely on yours. Hello, you say. Lady Marjorie leaves the room for a moment. She goes downstairs and says 2 words to Thomas. You find out. Later what they were, both well. You hear, through the floorboards, a sound that you later will decide was Thomas Fitch putting his fist against the wall in the specific way of someone who needed somewhere to put an emotion. 3 days. You stay in the room for 3 days, which is the standard period. Complete rest. The child, you name her Margaret after your nurse and because Lady Marjorie's face when you say it is worth remembering, sleeps in short intervals and eats in short intervals and is, you discover, startlingly loud about expressing preferences. The world outside continues. More news from the south. The pestilence is in England. It arrived at port in the southwest, Weymouth, the letters say, in June. It is moving north. You are aware of this news with a part of yourself that is not quite operational yet. You are aware of Thomas coming to sit with you each evening, when the specific conventions about the lying in are relaxed enough to permit it. You are aware of Margaret's weight in your arms, which is changing already daily. She is growing visibly, rapidly. You are aware of how much of you was used. Labour takes a lot. Not just the labour itself, the hours, the exhaustion, but the aftermath. The body reclaims itself slowly. What you can do in the days afterward is substantially less than what you could do in August. You watch your hands doing the slow work of feeding your daughter, and you think about everything they've done this year. The cold water from the well, the mortar and pestle in the still room, the comb Thomas brought from Lincoln, the embroidery you haven't finished. Your hands are rougher than they were on your wedding morning, cracked and reddened at the knuckles, the skin of your palms toughened, working hands. You think of your mother's hands, the quick certain movement fastening the 32 buttons down each forearm on your wedding morning, the same hands that held a cup of tea out to you on various difficult mornings of your childhood. You think, I am a mother now. October, 1 year exactly since your wedding. You're 16. You have a daughter who is a month old and has opinions. You have a household that you understand significantly better than you did a year ago, though significantly less well than Lady Marjorie does, and you have made your peace with this distinction. You have a husband who comes home before dark. The pestilence is closer. This is the background of everything now. The news from each week is darker than the last. It is in the towns to the south. People are dying in numbers that challenge comprehension. A third, some say more. The still room is stocked with everything that might help. Alice Thornton has been in to advise on additional precautions. The manor is careful about who comes through the gate. You're afraid of the pestilence. You would be strange if you weren't. But the fear is different than the labour fear. The labour fear was immediate and specific and had a boundary. It would end one way or another. The pestilence fear has no boundary. It is diffuse. It is everywhere the news comes from. You respond to it the way you have learned this year to respond to the things you cannot control, by attending to what you can. The household, the still room, your daughter, your husband. Thomas, in the evenings now, has taken up the still room records. Not the practical work, that's yours and Lady Marjorie's, but the accounting, the records of what's been made, what's been used, what needs restocking. He does it with the same concentration he brings to the estate accounts. Numbers he can control when the world outside the accounts is increasingly uncontrollable. You work beside him. The fire, Margaret asleep, the house quiet around you. You think about the girl on the wedding morning, looking at herself in the polished metal mirror and barely recognizing herself. She was right not to recognize herself. She was looking at the last version of someone who is about to become someone else. What you are now, a woman who knows the weight of a good wool bolt in her hands and can identify the dye quality by the way the colour sits. A woman who can read the still room's inventory in a glance and know what's needed. A woman who knows how to navigate Lady Marjorie Fitch, which is a skill several people in this county would pay for. A woman who survived. Not just the labour, everything. The transfer to strangers, the flat cold Lincolnshire winter, the slow learning of a whole life from the beginning. There are things you are not told, still aren't told. The pestilence will be worse than you can currently imagine, and you'll face things in the next year that will ask more of you than you know how to give. But here is what you know now that Agnes Mercer didn't know on the morning of her wedding. You can handle things, not everything, not always without cost, but you can put your hands to difficult things and work at them and come through. That's not a small thing. That's most of it, actually. The evening of your daughter's first full month. The house is quiet. Thomas is in the study with the accounts. Lady Marjorie has retired. Margaret is asleep, finally, after an hour of insisting she wasn't. You sit by the window in the room that is now yours. Not just yours and Thomas's, but yours. The room where you keep your book of still-room notes and the unfinished embroidery and the comb, and you watch the darkness. Lincolnshire dark is different from York dark. In York, the dark was never complete. The city was always doing something. Even at midnight there were sounds, lights in windows, the constant evidence of 10,000 lives going on. Here, the dark is more total. The stars, when the sky is clear, are more numerous than you've ever seen, unchallenged by competing light. The quiet is deep enough to hear small things. The shift of the house as it cools, the distant sound of the wind in the field edges, an owl. The owl hunts. From the oak tree at the corner of the yard, you've learned its patterns. It hunts around midnight. You've heard it many times on the nights when Margaret's irregular schedule and your own nervous wakefulness coincide. You open your still-room book, turn to the most recent entry. Preparations for fever, October. A recipe for a compress. Below that, a note about rosehip syrup. The rosehips were particularly good this year, more of them than last, and you've put up more than usual, which is an instinct you trust without knowing quite why. Below that, a blank page. You pick up the pen, you write, things I was not told. And then you sit there with the pen over the page and you think about what to write. Not with bitterness, not with blame exactly, though there is something in you that knows the silence was a cost, that the gaps in your knowledge at 15 had consequences, that some of those consequences could have been worse, but also the women who didn't tell you were the same women, who gave you ginger tea and stood beside you in the labour, who told you the things they knew in the moments they knew to tell them, who passed knowledge in the only channels they had. They were doing what was done, which is not the same as it being right, but it is the thing that's true. You write, the body knows before the mind. Trust it. Fear is information, not a verdict. The people you cannot change are still worth watching, because watching is how you learn. Some things you will only know by living them. You look at what you've written. It's not enough. It's never going to be enough, the words that could be written on a page versus the full weight of what was lived. But Margaret is asleep. The owl is out. The house is warm. And you're here. The months turn. Autumn deepens into the winter that is also the winter of the pestilence coming north, though it will reach Lincolnshire in the spring, and what happens then is another story entirely. For now, the frost, the short days, the household pulled in tight around the fire. Margaret grows. She is noisy and specific about her preferences and has, at 10 weeks, already figured out that looking at Thomas produces a particular expression on his face that she finds rewarding. She deploys this strategically. Thomas is helpless against it. He manages it by pretending not to notice. You notice him not noticing. The household and you continue to negotiate. Lady Marjorie gives up the still-room more and more to you. Not the whole household. Not yet, not until she chooses to step back, and she will choose this in her own time. But the still-room is yours. The quiet room with the dried herbs and the mortar, and the small still, and the book that you're filling with careful notes is yours. When Alice Thornton comes, she comes to talk to you as well as Lady Marjorie. When a tenant sends word about a sick child, you go, carefully, cautiously, keeping the pestilence precautions in mind, and you go with the right things in your bag. You learn. You keep learning. Spring comes, as it always does, regardless of what else is happening. The green comes back, the birds come back, the drainage channels run high with melt and rain, and Thomas and Henry spend 3 weeks dealing with it, which is apparently an eternal truth of Lincolnshire. Someone is always dealing with the drainage. The news from the south gets worse, and then worse than that. And then the news stops coming from certain places because there is no one left to send news. You have the household, you have the preparations, you have Lady Marjorie and Thomas and Alice and Maud, and all the careful precautions of a household that chose to be ready. Some of it will be enough, some of it won't. But that is another year's story. Tonight, this October evening, this first year of your marriage evening, this evening when Margaret is a month old and the world is quiet and the owl is hunting, tonight you are here. You are warm and fed, and your daughter is breathing in the next room. You've survived the first year. You've survived everything the first year contained. The candle is burning low. Tomorrow there will be more. The drainage, and the household accounts, and the still room, and the particular complaint from the tenant on the eastern field that Thomas has been putting off addressing. Tomorrow the pestilence news will be darker than today's. Tomorrow Margaret will need feeding at intervals that mock your rest schedule. Tomorrow is tomorrow, but that's tomorrow. Right now there is only the window, and the dark outside it, and the fire that is settling into the deep orange stage that means it will hold for hours without tending. You put the still room book away. You think about the girl on the wedding morning, 15 years old, standing in her father's house in her crimson dress with borrowed pearls, waiting to go to a church and say words that would change everything, not knowing what changed everything meant, not knowing what was on the other side. She was right to be afraid. She was also going to be all right. She just didn't know it yet. You didn't know it yet. These are the same person. You. Upstairs. The attic room. In York there was an attic room where Margaret the nurse slept on a truckle bed, and you slept on the good mattress and heard the sounds of the city filtering up through the floors. There was a particular quality to that city sound, always there, always present, the evidence that you were surrounded by thousands of lives doing their daily work. Here there is no attic room. Here you sleep in the room that is now yours and Thomas's, which is both of yours, and the sound through the walls is the Lincolnshire quiet, that is not really quiet, but is all the small sounds of a sleeping house, and a sleeping village, and the land going on doing what land does in the dark. You lie down. Thomas is already asleep. His breathing, slow and steady and deep, the breathing of someone who works hard with his body, and therefore sleeps hard. He sleeps on his side. He takes up approximately 60% of the bed, which you have dealt with by claiming the other 40%, with a certainty he has stopped challenging. Margaret's breathing from the next room, small and even. Two people breathing in the dark. The sounds of the house, the tick of cooling stone, the shift of a timber somewhere in the roof. The owl outside doing its work. You close your eyes. Today was a year. A whole year since the wedding morning, the crimson dress, the Minster bells, the ring going on your finger. What the year contained. The road to Heckington, the flat autumn fields, the cold of the first winter, your hands cracking at the knuckles. The still room. Lady Marjorie teaching you how to read the dried herbs, what the chamomile smells like versus the yarrow. The specific silence of February when it became clear something was growing in you. The feel of the mortar in your hands, the smell of lavender from the sachets your mother packed in your linen, the warmth of Thomas building the fire before you were fully awake, the labour, Alice Thornton's steady voice, Lady Marjorie saying your name, the sound in the room when your daughter arrived. The fire in the hearth has settled to a glow now, not much light, just warmth. Your body is heavy against the mattress, every limb certain of its location. This specific weight, the tired after working weight, the weight of a body that has done what it came to do today and is ready to release the day entirely. Your thoughts slow, begin to drift. Centuries will pass. The house at Heckington will be rebuilt, altered, eventually lost to time in the way all buildings eventually are. The village will remain. The fields will be drained and redrained by people who haven't been born yet. The flat Lincolnshire sky will remain. The pestilence will come and pass and come again. And eventually, in some deep future that you cannot see from here, the worst of it will be over, and people will live differently, and all of the things that felt permanent, the arrangements between men and women, the ceremonies, the contracts, the particular ways power moves, will slowly change into something else. The still-room knowledge, the willow bark, the ginger tea, the careful empirical medicine of women will eventually be absorbed into science and codified and given professional names. The women who carried it will mostly go unnamed, but the knowledge will survive, because it was true, because it worked, because the women who held it cared about whether it worked. Some things don't change. The fear at the beginning of something large, the way a hand holds a hand in the hardest hours, this sound of breathing beside you when you wake in the dark and need to know you're not alone. These things don't change. These are what you carry. You are Agnes Fitch. You are Agnes Mercer. You are 15 years old, and you are also every age you'll be from here. You are still learning. You have time. Let the sounds of the house go quiet. Let the owl outside do its work without you watching. Let the fire settle. Let the dark deepen. Let the cold at the window edges stay at the window edges, where it belongs. You have Thomas beside you. You have Margaret breathing in the next room. You have your hands, rough at the knuckles and capable. You have survived everything the year contained. You have survived it. That's enough. That's enough. The last thing you hear is something small and distant, a sound from the village probably, the bell above the church that marks the hours in the night. You try to count. You lose count before you get there, and then there is nothing. Just rest. Just the long, slow, absolute drift into dreams where no one asks anything of you. You've earned it. Take it. Good night.